Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar of Squire Patent Bogs in partnership with Thomas Murray, Are You Cyber and NIS2 Ready? My name is Nicole Santa Clara, Business Development Coordinator at Squire Patent Bogs. We have a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started. Please take note that this webinar will be recorded. If you experience any technical issues with a WebEx session, please send a message via the Q&A panel asking for assistance. Select Host and press Send. This will be picked up by our IT support colleagues. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A panel, which is located in the lower right part of your screen. Please type your questions into the text field, select the drop-down as All Panelists, and press Send. Our panelists will aim to answer these by the end of the session. Today, your presenters will be utilizing their webcams. For optimal viewing of the webcam and for best event experience, we recommend that you change your view. You can do this by going to the top right-hand corner of your screen. Click on Layout and select Side by Side. Periodically, there will also be some polling questions that will appear on your screen. They will appear on the right-hand side. Please take a moment to select your answers and press Submit button to share your response. The results will be shared in a confidential format after the poll has closed. Thank you very much. I'll hand it over now to Charles.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nicole, and thanks everyone for attending. I also want to thank all of my co-panelists who are with me today to discuss a topic that is, we believe, of great interest, especially because EU cybersecurity has been for a little while on the top of the agenda. And you have certainly heard that capitalizing on the success of previous legislation, the EU is coming with a strange new acronym called NIS2 that we hope to shed some light on in the course of this session. What I'll do is that I'll probably introduce very briefly each speaker before they speak, rather than doing that in one go. No. And Nicole, if we can move to the next slide, I'll just very briefly introduce the menu for today. So basically, what we are aiming to cover in those 45 to 1 hour that we have together. So first, we're gonna mention some of the importance of why and how cyber risk needs to be tackled, probably no more than ever. The relevance to have and to demonstrate that the board of directors is in control of the matter, and that there is an oversight and responsibility taken by the C-suite on cyber matters. We know that there are a lot of things coming to C-level those days. Privacy was high for a long time, and it probably still is. AI is eventually ESG, but cyber is for sure one that needs to get the attention of everyone. We'll then provide some background on NIS2. So what it derives from, what are the reason for NIS2 to come into play. We'll then cover the scope of NIS2, so how does it apply to, briefly discuss some of the requirements, and then probably as importantly, what are the next steps? So what needs to be done for trying to operationalize the requirement of NIS into your day-to-day organization. As Nicole mentioned, we will have some Q&A in the end. Please just, we all encourage you to share as much questions as you want. We'll try to address them in the end. And Nicole announced a little polling session in the course of the webinar. So before introducing you to Andrea, we'll cover Marion, sorry, we'll cover the first piece. Let's go to some poll, if you don't mind, Nicole. So basically the question there is, does your organization currently have NIS2 compliance program established? and you can choose between them. Between different options. So no, we do, but it's not clear who's owning it. It's owned by legal, it's owned by cyber, by compliance, or by any different function. Frankly, if you already have that framework under NIS1, you can probably also complete the poll, but we'll be curious to see the answer to those. And whilst you are responding, let me introduce you to Marion Cavalier, a senior associate in the SPB office in Paris, who will then cover the cyber risk management and explain to us why it's a board issue. Marion, if and when the poll is closed, and Nicole, you will give us the go, we can move to your piece. Thank you.
The first poll is now closed. I will now be publishing the results.
Thank you, Nicole. So yeah, hopefully there will be some interest in following the session, and then make sure that you do have something in place if it happens that you are in scope. So with that, Mario, up to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. All right, Nicole, we can maybe move to our slides, and maybe you can put on the first slide. And cyber risk management is a board level issue. Maybe you can just skip that one, yeah, and go straight to this one. Yeah, thank you. So because of these new cybersecurity laws, but overall because cyber risk is increasing and have significant business consequences, cyber risk management is an issue which should be managed and overviewed by the company's top management. This is really what the business is expecting investors, and this is also what regulators expect. And it is said in so many words in NIS2. There's actually a specific article, Article 20 on governance in NIS2, which specifically provide that member states shall ensure that the management bodies, so the board basically, of the entities falling within the scope of NIS2 should approve the cybersecurity risk management measures, oversee its implementation, and can be held liable for infringements by the entities. So the member states will each legislate and decide how the management may be held liable. But the preamble of the directive does provide some insight. It says that in order to further strengthen the effectiveness and dissuasiveness of the directive, the competent authorities should be empowered to request the imposition of a temporary prohibition of the exercise of managerial functions by any natural person discharging managerial responsibility at CEO level or legal representative level. And what's also interesting is that in this same Article 20 on governance, it provides that the management has training obligations. It specifically provides that members of the management bodies are required to follow training on a regular basis in order that they gain sufficient knowledge and skills to enable them to identify risks and assess cybersecurity risk management practices and their impact on the services provided by the entity, their company. So we are talking about the law specifically targeting the top management and holding them accountable. This Article 20 is a substantial change from NIS1 and a clear statement of intent that compliance is a top-down process and not just a bottom-up one. So how do we make sure of this? I mean, boards and executives are generally aware that security is a risk and are increasingly demonstrating support by signing off financial support and additional headcount to manage risks, but they are not always really going into the detail. I think it seems that it is now inevitable and required. The board can use normal oversight approaches, and the extra challenge now, it will be that we need to evidence this now, that it complies with the requirement of this new article in NIS2. In practice, it means having processes by which the board is informed about cyber risks, having discussions, The goal is really to have the board take into account cyber risks as part of their business strategy, risk management, and financial oversight. Board members should not just hear about the protection put in place or, let's say, the results of the latest cybersecurity phishing exercise. Board members must take the position that cyber attacks are likely and exercise that oversight role and power to ensure that executives and managers have made proper and appropriate preparation to respond and recover. Nicole, maybe we can go to the next slide. I think this is the intention because cyber attacks have significant consequences, multiple and significant consequences. The obvious and very direct ones are the consequences which are directly intended by the attackers, the compromission of data, unauthorized access of data and data loss. And we want to stress that compromised company data may cover many types of data about employees, data about the IP, about the trade secrets of the company, data about clients, sensitive information about those clients, including financial information, which is always important and risky. In addition, cyber attacks can cause business disruption, denial of service, break computers, etc. Other significant consequences include harm to brand, reputation harm, loss of consumer trust, loss of investors' confidence, and media scrutiny. And there are obviously also legal risks in terms of liability. Consequences can include executive resignation as well. We have seen that these past years executives also facing charges or receiving convictions due to cybersecurity incidents and data breaches. It will probably be more and more the case considering the new provision I just talked about before. Nicole, next slide, please. So if we assume that every organization has a likely risk of being breached or attacked, and it's not possible to be 100% protected from every attack, the most rational approach is to make sure that the organization is prepared, has a response plan in place, and can recover with little or no damage to operations, to the financial bottom line, and to the organization's reputation. Typically, companies of all sizes should have an incident response plan that helps to respond effectively to cyber incidents. Such plan should clearly state goals and objectives. It should list and categorize the types of incident covered by the plan, assess the severity of each category and a plan of deployment for each type of incident. It should identify response team members and their respective roles. It should define a process that enables agile decision-making by the response team. It should also include cyber risk resilience steps and action. Such plans are typically exercised, like a tabletop exercise, assessed and revised on a regular basis in light of new threats, business activities, or technologies. Nicole, if we could move to the next slide, thanks. So from the legal perspective, this incident response plan should obviously take into account regulatory requirements, in particular, reporting requirements. Because reporting requirements are very time-consuming, or should I say like first hours urgent time-consuming, having a response plan taking this into account is very necessary, not to lose time during these very precious first hours. I'm talking about the GDPR reporting requirement, the notification to the Data Protection Authority that must be made within the 72 hours following the knowledge of the breach. And of course, the NIS2 requirement, which is the topic of our webinar, which existed in NIS1, but which now will require even more reactiveness and preparedness. In the NIS2, there are more detailed steps that must be implemented in case of an incident. The NIS2 requires an early warning ASAP to the authority and within 24 hours maximum after becoming aware of it. So we're talking really, really urgent one. After that, there is a more classic notification within 72 hours. And there is also some follow-up, a final report that must be provided to the authorities within the months following the incident. And the authorities can even require an intermediate, like an update on the report before that. So we'll now go into more details about NIS2. Charles, I think you will take the floor for next poll.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. Thanks a lot for going through those different elements. And indeed, so we started briefly now to touch the NIS2 notification requirement. If you were unaware of how those work, so the terms that you should remind yourself is a significant incident. And we'll cover that in more details in a couple of slides. But and also, what is critical is that the notification requirements have kind of changed and evolved since NIS1. And so the poll question, even if we appreciate that you probably even don't know yet if you are within the scope of NIS2, yes or no, the poll question aims to try to see your level of confidence about the ability to meet the notification obligation under NIS2. So that probably requires you to answer, am I subject to NIS2? Do I know what a significant incident is? And do I know what kind of reporting requirements I have to comply with? I would love to see 100% response saying that you are all very confident, but let's see what the result will be. And whilst you are voting, let me introduce you to Andrea. So Andrea is an associate in the Brussels office, and she will be speaking about the NIS2 background and explain in more details how that little piece of cybersecurity requirement fits into the broader EU cyber agenda. So by the time the poll is closed and Nicole will give us the go, Andrea, the floor will be yours. Thank you.
Just leaving a few seconds for anyone else who would like to join in the poll. Last 20 seconds. All right, thanks for participating. I will now close the poll. Here are the results.
We get a slightly spread level of response, and we still have a couple of people who are not answering, probably because they don't want to show any kind of signs on where they are, and that's completely accepted. We hope that you will have more confidence at the end of the session. So, Andrea, up to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So, well, understanding the impact of cyber threats, such as the ones that Marion has exposed, shows the critical importance of robust cybersecurity measures and policies. So if we go to the next slide, we will see that from the European perspective, the current framework consists in different cybersecurity rules. Some of them are focused on increasing resilience to cyber attacks and the responsiveness level, like the Cyber Resilience Act and the Cybersecurity Act, while others focus more on increasing collaboration between entities to enhance detection, such as the Cyber Solidarity Act. In this context, it is also relevant to mention the EU cybersecurity strategy that was developed as a response to the intensified digital transformation in 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis and the rise in the cybersecurity incidents. And this strategy aimed to boost Europe's ability to fight and recover from cyber attacks. And it is within this strategy that the Commission proposed a new bunch of cybersecurity rules, as well as to reform the NIS Directive. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, as I said, NIS2 replaces the NIS Directive, which was adopted in 2016 and was the first horizontal cybersecurity regulatory instrument. It aimed to install a minimum level of security with network and information systems to smoothen the functioning of the internal market. However, the transposition of NIS1 proved to be a challenge for various member states. The Commission actually concluded that there was a lacking common understanding of the main threats and challenges, as well as an inconsistent resilience across member states. Therefore, the NIS2 directive was proposed in the context of this new cybersecurity strategy to unlock the full potential of NIS1 and was aimed to enforce a higher level of common security practices, ensure uniformity in implementation across EU member states, and expand the scope to cover additional sectors, categorizing them as either essential or important entities instead of the previous classification, which was operators of essential entities and digital service providers. NIS2 was finally adopted on December 2022, and each EU member state has until October 17, 2024 to transpose the NIS2 directive into its national legislation. It should be noted that certain types of entities, such as DNS and cloud computing service providers, among others, will need to be part of a registry created by ENISA. For this purpose, these type of entities will have to register with their competent authorities by January 17, 2025. Therefore, they will need to provide information such as the name of the entity, the relevant sector, the address of the main establishment, as well as some other details. It is important in this context that companies determine if they are indeed under the categories that need to notify and to do it by the established deadline. So now in the next slides, we will focus a bit more on the changes introduced by NIS2. If we could go to the next one, Nicole. So in terms of changes, it is worth mentioning the following. So for supervision and enforcement, NIS2 has introduced more stringent measures, also general conditions for imposing administrative fines on essential and important entities, as well as liability of top management, as Marion has previously mentioned. In addition, to improve cross-border collaboration among member states, new authorities have been established to coordinate management of large-scale cybersecurity incidents at European level, as well as to increase information sharing and cooperation. Finally, as it will be further explained in the next sections, the cybersecurity risk management requirements have also been strengthened with a specific focus on the incident reporting obligations, as it was also explained by Marion previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. So it's then my great pleasure to introduce Bart, partner in the our Madrid office, who will help us all and guide us through the determination of the scope of application of NIS2. And without spoiling anything, it's important that you all keep in mind that the fact that you were not subject to NIS1 doesn't mean you can escape NIS2. To the contrary, probably, because the legislation has been built in a way that we had a limited scope of application, at least on the legal hard side of things, initially under NIS1, so with a limited number of sectors and a limited group of entities in scope. But that has changed under NIS2. So Bart, to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's go for more fun. So if we go to the next slide, please. So NSI2 has expanded the scope of of these sectors that are under the directive, and based on their criticality to the economy and society, and as Charles was mentioning, eliminating the distinction between operators of essential services and digital service providers, classifying them as either essential entities or important entities, as you can see on the screen. Designation as an essential entity is notified by the authorities in each territory on an individual basis, and this is something that sometimes comes on a top secret way. So it's kind of a letter that you receive from the cybersecurity authorities stating that you have been designated as such. So who is to be designated as an essential entity? Well, all those already designated as such under NIS1, but on top of those, also qualified trust service providers and top-level domain name registries, as well as DNS service providers, providers of public electronic communication networks, or of publicly available electronic communication services, and public administrations, both central and regional governments. And in addition to that, those included in the list in Annex 1 of NIS2, when they exceed some sailings, and as you can see there, they are at least 250 full-time employees, or 50 million annual turnover, or 23 million annual balance sheet total, which are, the thresholds that are included in recommendation 2003 361 of the European Commission. However, despite this classification, and we will see that in the following slides, the authorities may decide to designate an entity outside this scope as an essential entity. Important entities will include all entities that fall under the scope of Annex 1 of NIS2, which do not exceed the sailings that we have mentioned before. All entities listed in Annex 2 of NIS2 Directive, and all of the rest of entities that might be designated as such by the European Union member states based on a risk assessment. However, the change associated with this new classification is far from being merely semantic or to include additional sectors, but actually implies a significant change in approach. Whilst under NIS1, digital service providers were regulated as sort of a second-tier entities with very limited obligations. Under NIS2, they jump to the first tier and are subject to the same obligations as essential entities. Charles will go deeper on them in a few minutes. So what is the difference? The difference is in the type of supervision they will be subject to. So while significant entities will be, while essential entities will be subject to ex-ante supervision, in addition to ex-post supervision, important entities will only be subject to ex-post supervision. This means that important entities will only be investigated if there is evidence or indications of non-compliance, while essential entities will be subject to supervision irrespectively of that. Similarly, while essential entities will be subject to regular and targeted security audits, important entities will only be subject to targeted audits. So, and finally, essential entities may also be subject to ad hoc audits, for instance, after a severe incident. So there is a significant change, not only in the scope of obligations that needs to be fulfilled by the important entities, but also in the way the authorities will supervise them. We move to the next slide, please. Now, as for the scope of the critical sectors, so here you can see that they have been divided into high criticality sectors and other critical sectors. We have more both high criticality and other critical sectors than what we had under NIS1. To NIS1 sectors, energy, transport, banks, financial market infrastructure, health, water supply and digital infrastructure, we have added public administrations, ICT service management, and space. So we do have 3 more than we had before. Then you can also see what the other critical sectors are, which include postal or courier services, which might be a little surprising, but are really important to maintain and subject now in the way they operate to attacks and cyber attacks. So let's move to the next one, please. Here you have a table published by the Belgian authorities where you can see how the decision-making process, well, you can see if you have very good eyes, you can see how the decision-making process will in principle be taking place for designation of both essential and important entities. In this one, you can see those for high criticality sectors, and in the next one, we will move to the next one, you will see for the important entities. So there you can see, well, if you have interest, you can actually have a look at how this will be done. Let's move on. Yeah, again. Okay, now, in terms of jurisdiction, under NIS2, both essential and important entities are deemed to be under the jurisdiction of the member state where they provide their services. This means that if the entity provides services in more than one member state, it should fall under the jurisdiction of each of these member states, except if the exceptional regime that is contained in Article 26(1) of the NIS2 applies, in which case the company would become under the jurisdiction of the state where it has its main establishment, which is understood as where the decisions in terms of cybersecurity are made, or alternatively, where it has the highest number of employees. So you can see here that this exceptional regime applies to providers of public electronic communication networks or providers of publicly available electronic communication services, and DNS service providers, TLD name registries, entities providing domain name registration services, cloud computing services, data center service providers, content delivery network providers, managed service providers, and so on. You can read them in the slide. What happens if you are not established in the union? You can see here, actually, with the yes and no, where you are established or not. If you are not established in the union, but still offers services within the union, you will be required to designate a representative in the union. And it will be the territory, the member state where this representative has been designated, the one that will have supervision or jurisdiction over you. What happens if you don't designate a representative is that in all member states where you are providing the services, you will be subject to jurisdiction. And I think with this, we can move on to the next section, Charles.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bart. And so we can move to the next slide. So the good news is that I'm covering that, so I probably don't need to introduce myself to myself. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you, Nicole. So basically, what we have done here is explain or try to list the additional requirement that transition from NIS1 to NIS2. So we received from Andrea the explanation on why the EU considered it was necessary to level up and move from NIS1 to NIS2. Bart also mentioned and explained the kind of tests that need to apply to see whether or not you are covered by NIS2. And now we come down to what it actually means in practice. Before jumping into that, I think we should all recognize that the European Commission and the European Union in general has done a pretty good job in the way they approach this matter. Not surprisingly, we are approaching it very differently than many other jurisdictions. So if you look at the approach to cybersecurity on the US side, for a long, long time, they have a very long tradition of best practices guidelines, a lot of information made available through organizations such as NIS2. And on the EU side, of course, we took a different approach, which is the approach we do best, which is regulate, regulate, and regulate. But as it was perceived that introducing out of the blue hard cybersecurity requirement to those sectors might prove to be complicated, really the Union took a kind of step-by-step approach, which I believe was the right one to take in those matters. And Ed, if you have comments after I speak, feel free to jump in on that. Because basically what the EU did is first under NIS1 have a limited scope, so limited number of sectors, and within those sectors only a limited amount of entities being covered by law. That means as well a limited number of entities to supervise. Nevertheless, those entities that were identified as belonging to very critical sectors and within those sectors being themselves very critical, of course, they had to take cybersecurity seriously because they had to comply by law. And what we saw happening was really sharing of the burden of the compliance with the law across the supply chain through contract. And that forced maturity of the supply chain to develop and grow. And when that happened, the EU was then able to get rid of that narrow approach to some extent, so still focusing on only the highly critical piece, but then approach it more broadly, basically saying, if you are in those sectors, really you should be covered by the law. Bart explained that you might be coded differently depending on who you are, but really the laws applies to you, meaning that you will have receive effective supervision if you don't handle properly, with big sanction attached for non-compliance, and a sanction that goes up to personal liabilities of directors, which very often is what needs to be put in legislation to make sure that people are working and actually delivering on the compliance side. So on the NIS1 side, really the requirements were threefold. And of course, it's an oversimplification, but I think it's still useful to go through those. So you had really three big buckets about governance, protection, and defense and resilience. To Andrea's point, NIS is not so much about preventing attack to happen, because everyone knows that attacks will eventually happen. But more importantly, making sure that if and when something significant happens, you have in place a plan that allows to deal with it and to build from those attacks. So on the governance side, really it was about making sure that you had a security policy in place, that you know the ecosystem, which, and Ed, I'm sure will have some comments there as well. For organization, ecosystem mapping is probably one of the toughest tasks, because there are all of those networks that are survival from legacy operation that no one knows why they are still live, but you still need to make sure that you know what's happening on them. And on your governance side, you also had some auditing required. On the protection side, not surprisingly, the most two relevant matters were require system segregation, so really knowing the core jewel of an IT infrastructure, and make sure that those were segregated and protected accordingly. And also, because that was an important part of the protection, making sure that you only have access on a kind of need-to-know basis, and that you have throughout and complete identity access management processes in place. On the defense and resilience side, NIS1 was about having an incident response plan, having some business continuity, and monitoring what was happening to try to spot if and when a security incident was happening. We can move to the next slide, Nicole, if you don't mind. Thank you. And here, basically, and I'll probably not go into each and every of those little addition, but just by the number, you see that NIS2 provides for much more in each of those three buckets. I think on the governance side, it's probably more an elaboration and a listing of what was anyway required under NIS1, but you will see that there is no very importance given to the fact that you need to have in place and maintain policies on risk analysis, for example, policies and procedures on the use of cryptography and encryption, specific attention to human resources security, and that you know exactly what you are doing, so having a registry. On the protection side, here as well, rather than leaving completely to entities to decide what kind of measures they have to put in place to be cyber resilient, you start to see some more prescriptive rules coming the way. And so there are references to security throughout the supply chain, security in the network, multi-factor authentication as one of the key components of those security measures. But that's just a couple of them. On the defense and resilience matter, we now have, as Andrea already explained, or Marion, sorry, already explained, we now have a more detailed incident handling, notification and reporting, and more requirement around business continuity. What I think is critical as well to keep in mind is that under NIS1, basically the organization that was encountering a major or significant incident had as main responsibility to notify a supervisory authority that will then took over and almost control the response to the incident. It's slightly different under NIS2 because you will now also be accountable towards end user with a notification requirement or communication at least to those affected, which I believe it's an important novelty. Before I move to supervision, I don't know, Ed, if you want to make any comment there, I'll certainly value your input on that front as well.
Yeah, I think NIS2 is a recognition that cybersecurity attacks impact not just businesses independently, but broader civil society. And I think that's been recently articulated by the UK ambassador at the UN in the last couple of weeks. So ransomware attacks cause or have the potential to cause civil disturbance. Like the level of dependence that civil society has on technology is now at such an extent where it has to be taken seriously. And yes, the US has adopted a different approach, but we're still seeing attacks there. Europe is now adopting kind of a regulatory approach and being very prescriptive with what's required, but all for very good reason. I was in Lithuania at the beginning of the year, and on the day that I was there, the electronic charging ports for cars were taken down by an external DDoS attack. So only for a short period of time, but you're starting to impact the rights of individuals for free movement. All of these things, which I think on the face of it, businesses might not necessarily see because they're looking at their own risk independently. So NIS is fantastic for civil society. It's prescriptive in what it requires.
Thank you, Ed. And I'll give you the floor back in a second. For all those who want to have a sense on the impact on the supply chain, I highly recommend you the reading of Blackout from Mark Elbrink. It's a wonderful demonstration on why and how a little piece somewhere creates a massive outbreak in energy supply throughout the EU. So it's kind of fiction, but probably not so much fiction anymore. So if we can move to the next slide, Nicole, that would be very kind. Thank you. So before handing over to Ed, a couple of words on supervision and enforcement, even if most of that was covered by Andrea already. What is important to keep in mind is that entities so subject to the supervision and enforcement of those authorities will face both on-site and off-site inspection and supervision. Andrea mentioned random check based on risk assessment and risk-related information. There will be security scan based on objective and non-discriminatory, fair and transparent risk assessment criteria. And I think I mentioned that already, but I think it's really important because it's a recognition of the shift and the fact that we are going to another level on the measures against non-compliance. So in addition to warnings, fines, and public statement, we can also go up to temporary removal of directors that are not providing the right oversight and personal liability eventually of directors, so which is important. And with that, note to Ed, so Ed from Thomas Murray, with whom we are doing this webinar in partnership with, and we are very happy to benefit from Ed experience. So Ed, to you on the operationalizing of NIS2 compliance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So hopefully what's been portrayed to you so far is that this is a big deal. Lots of organizations are going to be impacted by it. The cost or the price or the cost to individuals and businesses for getting this wrong is significant. So what do you need to do? Let's take some time to just walk through the steps and yeah, piece it together. So if I could have the next slide, please. So the first thing is take a deep breath. There's lots going on. We're talking about kind of personal liability and this kind of thing, but personal experience when it comes to cybersecurity technology, it doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates within the broader business context. So actually slowing down and making strategic decisions about cybersecurity is absolutely fundamental. All too often we see reactive controls that go in, reactive piece of technology, often at the detriment to those organizations. So let's slow it down. Confirm that your what your obligations are under NIS2. It sounds obvious, but not all organizations are impacted by this. The information that's been provided on the previous slides is fantastic. Take some time to go through it, sit down, seek external counsel, however you want to do it. But let's confirm kind of what it is that you need to do. Education is going to be absolutely fundamental within the business. Personal liability is something that's growing within cybersecurity more broadly, but it's being kind of articulated in a very specific way here in Europe. I was going to say here in Europe. Let's not go into that. But it's also something that's growing in the US. So there's kind of correlation that we're seeing there. Getting individuals on board to drive change across the business is going to be key. You've seen the notification requirements. This is going to be something that you're going to need buy-in across the business if this is going to be done effectively. Next, what we've said is NIS2 is fantastic. There's a good chance that as a business, you're looking at, or you already have some controls in place, and there's a good chance that they'll be mapped to other frameworks. So we talk about this in a moment, but take a moment, maybe look at a different framework and map the requirements of NIS2 to those frameworks, to those good practices, because talking to the teams internally, there's a good chance that some of this you might already be doing. Next bit, conduct a gap assessment. We talk about that in a bit. And the very last step there is to establish the level of effort required to achieve compliance. So the deadline is creeping up. What have we got? Time, resource, or money? Those are the three levers that you can pull. Time is quickly slipping away. You could throw additional resources at it, or additional money, or additional capital. So work out now what it is that you need to do, but that's only possible once you've done the things that we'll discuss on the next two slides. So if I could have the next slide, please. Perfect. I've got about the poll. So this is about the internal control framework. Some of these might be familiar to you, but yes, please take a moment to have a look at the poll.
And while you are voting, if you still have questions you want us to address in the Q&A session, that probably will last for 2 minutes, but we hope to have some room left. Feel free to put those in the Q&A. If we don't have time to address those, we'll respond to you as a follow-up. So please don't hesitate to have any questions there. Thank you.
Wonderful. How are we doing on the poll, Nicole?
Yeah, we just have 1 more minute just to allow everyone to answer the poll.
Cool. So whilst you're answering the poll, other frameworks are available. That's why we put other there. If we could just trot through them. So NIST, we've heard that that's a US kind of framework, but very, very kind of widely adopted. Cyber fundamentals. This is something that's come out of Belgium. So hats off to the Belgian Cybersecurity Centre for producing this and pushing it out. I think it's called Sci-Fun. I don't know, maybe that's a quirky take on the Belgian sense of humour there. So please, go away and have a look at that. And ISO 27001, which has been around for a long period of time, widely recognised within the space. All of them have different requirements. They provide different kind of benefits to businesses. However, there's a good chance that your business might be doing one of these already.
Yeah, and I am now going to close the poll and show the results.
Wonderful. Okay, so the most significant or the most common answer from a response is ISO 27001. So yeah, absolutely. Very, very well known, recently updated to reflect changes, I guess, in understanding and good practice. So yeah, take a moment to check on kind of, first of all, your scope, but we can talk about that at a different point. If you want to talk more about those kind of elements, then please, drop us, anybody on this particular session, an email, and we'll pick it up. So if I could have the next slide, please, that would be fantastic. Okay, so governance, protection, defense, and resilience, all absolutely key fundamental components within NIS2 directive. What we're saying here is it's just a visualization, really, of the point that we were trying to make earlier. So the frameworks exist. Best practice exists already. Don't go off and create this yourself. It's a lot of effort, a lot of overhead. 2 examples there: NIS Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, recently updated, and the Centre for Cybersecurity Belgium. But there are these very, very specific NIS2 directive components that you will need to include. So the notification requirement is very, very stringent, but you'll need to tailor your existing practices to make sure that you can kind of hit those timelines. Absolutely fundamental. So conducting a mapping exercise will help articulate kind of terminology and kind of alignment to best practice, as well as this regulatory kind of requirement. So if I could have the next slide, please. Perfect. So gap assessment and output. What is it that you're looking at? So the people, the processes, and technology. Bear with me just a moment here. So technology is last for a very, very good reason, and we'll come on to that in a minute. What are you actually looking for in terms of the outputs? You need to be honest. Like, the first thing is get the honesty as to where you are at this moment in time. Getting it wrong, there's a big cost to doing that. So I would always recommend obtaining an independent view, just because there's too much at risk here for it to be done internally. Desired state, where are you at the moment? What are your formal requirements? But then also bring in threat intelligence. Who are the threat actors that are out there? How are they attacking organizations such as yourself? What techniques are they using? This requires a level of intelligence and insight, intelligence within the cybersecurity terminology, not broad human intelligence, threat intelligence to actually do this accurately. It needs to be up to date, and it needs to be interpretable for the organization. Quick wins, as we said, time's ticking. Let's get those off quickly, identify those. Worst case, you want to be able to articulate to a regulator that you've done something. Even if you haven't done everything, doing something is better than doing nothing. Don't sit on your hands, take some action now. And then the larger initiatives, they are the bits of work that will fall off the back of this. There will likely be programs or activities that you'll need to do. However, understand what they are, and start documenting it, understand what it is. You might have to re-architect existing processes. Might have processes in place that already work, instant response, but the additional requirement for notification means that you might have to change the way you do that. So the outcomes, awareness, we spoke about this at the beginning, but the awareness leads on to education, future-proofing as well. So consideration of your NIS2 obligations needs to be, I guess you need to meet the requirements now, but you need to ensure that you're meeting the requirements in the future as well. So looking at change management, looking at the way that you introduce new products, the way that you introduce new services, onboard new vendors, all of these will have a NIS2 element. So actually looking at all of the processes, all of the elements that could impact your technology stack and your obligations for NIS2 need to be looked at. And lastly, proportionate compliance. I'm very conscious that I'm outnumbered here, but as a business, do you need to be 100% compliant? It's a business decision. It's a risk-based decision. I'm not saying either way, but that could be something that you take into account. But do it in an informed manner is what I'm stressing here. And the reason for leaving technology at the bottom, we're going to go back to that, is there's a tendency within cybersecurity and technology generally to throw money at products, to introduce new technology. The reality is that the vast majority of breaches occur because existing technology hasn't been implemented correctly. It's the unglamorous bit of technology. It's the unglamorous bit of cybersecurity. Attacks occur or attacks are successful because MFA hasn't been implemented across the estate, not because you didn't have the most recent up-to-date whizzy cyber tool. So yeah, get the basics right. Don't go and splurge on tech if there are fundamental bits that you can get correct. Thank you very much. I'll pass you back to Charles.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ed. Very insightful, and hopefully everyone attending can take all of those practical steps and start on a blank sheet of paper, if blank sheet of paper is where you are, and try to start leveraging and building up something. I don't see a question in the Q&A. If there are, can someone shout and tell me that I'm not doing that properly? But if indeed there are none, we will give you back 2 minutes of your time. I certainly want on my end to thank all the co-panelists, and a special thanks, of course, to Ed and Thomas Murray. Thanks for joining for this session. We very appreciate that. And very happy to answer any question you have later on. Thank you, and have a good remainder of your day, wherever you are. Thanks a lot.